Okay, Paul. So this is my attempt at a flipped lesson for my future hypothetical science class. So bear with me, sir. I'm going to give this a shot here. It's like my third take on this. Okay. So what you're looking at here, students, is a species lesson outline. All right. And this podcast is going to take about 10 minutes. You might want to reserve some time to watch it again, even this weekend, possibly. Get this done sometime this week so that you're prepared for class on Monday. We'll be reviewing and discussing this lecture. Then you're going to want to take some notes. So at least have a conceptual notion of the three distinct definitions of species that we're going to be going over, discussing in class on Monday, and there's one embedded question that you're going to have to research so that I'll know that you watched this podcast on Monday. All right, so without further ado, what is a species? Well, if you look at my outline here, I wrote that it is a class of organisms, or a taxon of organisms. So if you remember back to when we talked about Carl Linnaeus, or Carl von Linné, he is one of the first scientists that we, as biologists, give a lot of credit to in starting to classify organisms, and what he used was something called taxonomy. And he developed also binomial nomenclature, all right, the two-name system for naming organisms, the genus and species. Remember kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. We went over that. So now we're going to talk about the species. So, first I have three definitions here. Note: phonetic, phylogenetic, and biological definitions for species. So let's talk about the first one, phonetic species. So this is what Carl Linnaeus had to go on. Okay, he didn't have modern genetics. He lived a long time ago. He would see an organism, see other organisms that looked like it, and classify them together. A fish is a fish, a bird's a bird, a tree is a tree. What he had to look at were phenotypical characteristics. So phenotype, we'll get into this in genetics in our next unit, but phenotypes are what we see on the outside. So an organism's genetics, its genes encode for a phenotype, and that's what we see on the outside. So you might have a gene for black hair, and phenotypically that's expressed, and so we see black fur on a black bear. Okay, to oversimplify the idea. So I like to refer to this definition as it's a morpho-species concept. That's what I came up with. That's what I'm calling it. I wrote that down here. What's Mr. Burns talking about when I say that? I say morpho refers to what we're seeing, the morphology of an organism. And that's really how Carl Linnaeus went about it. He think morphology, think back to grade school. We learned the word metamorphosis, I'm sure, when you looked at butterflies. Okay, so metamorphosis means to change what one looks like. So the caterpillar to the butterfly, they changed. The morphology refers to the form and function and structure of an organism, the anatomical arrangement of an organism's parts. So Carl Linnaeus counted 4 legs on an organism. He said, 4 legs, it's a horse. Okay. There's a problem, though. When you're trying to define what species are by just simply looking at what you see on the outside, you run into an issue. And here's my first example to illustrate this. Eastern and western meadowlark. organisms can appear similar yet be distinct. All right, that's the first part of this. So here you have a picture, and you're probably looking at this and you're wondering, what the heck am I looking at? I'm looking at two birds. They're the same bird, right? In actuality, they're not. These are not the same species. The one on the left is the western meadowlark. Did I say that right? The one on the left. The one on the right is the eastern meadowlark. While they have the same name, except for the east and west, they are in fact two very distinct, different species. You have to be an ornithologist to figure that out. That's a bird scientist to know just by looking at them, probably. But these two birds, while they overlap in their range in the Midwestern United States, they have co-evolved to adapt this particular plumage, this color, for whatever reason suits them in the meadowlands of the Midwest, and this is what you get. But they are, in fact, two very distinct, different species. They don't even share the same genus. Okay. So that's why you're seeing that we have three different definitions, because no one particular definition works all the time, it would seem. So in Carl Linnaeus's day, this definition worked. In more modern times, we have developed things like genetics. All right, this is my next definition of a species. This is the phylogenetic species. Well, what is that? Oh, I'm sorry. Let me just pause, back up real quick. I had another example here for you. Harvester ants. Okay, this is they might appear different but be the same. So we looked at two things that were similar yet distinct, and that's an issue for this definition. Well, now we've got two things that are different but in fact are the same, and that's why this definition doesn't always work. Harvester ants are the example. Just real quick, let's look at them. Here's a pair of harvester ants. These are the same species. And I know you're probably thinking, but this one looks a lot different than this one. Well, what you're seeing is merely a different phenotypic expression. It has to do with chemical changes in the nest when these things were larval forms in the ant nest. This one was probably given less hormonal cues than this one, and this guy is probably, I'm no entomologist, that's an insect scientist. This guy is probably a worker ant, and this one is maybe a guard ant. Looks like they're communicating here with chemical cues via their antennae. But anyhow, that's why we need another definition. Phylogenetic definition. Philo, think phylogeny, or like phylum, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, right? And here we use modern techniques of genetics. So geneticists can help us out with this definition. They look at DNA, and what they find is that lots of organisms have the same DNA. So let's group them together and call them the same species. We got to find a way to. Defining species is all about finding ways to categorize and identify, classify, and group organisms. It makes it easier for biologists to talk about these things. So here's an example. Wolves, coyotes, and dogs. If I remember correctly, don't quote me, but I believe that wolves are Canis lupus. That's their genus and species. Coyotes are Canis latrans. And dogs are Canis domesticus, because we've domesticated them. We domesticated something that was probably like a wolf or a coyote a long time ago. It came up with domestic dogs. And here I've got an example of two other types of dogs, Chihuahuas and Great Danes. Okay. Two things that look very different. I'm sure you all are familiar with what a Chihuahua looks like. Great Dane is another type of dog, a big thing. which brings me to my next point. Actually, let's just, for note's sake, it's the smallest set of organisms that share a common ancestor. Okay? It's kind of the working definition there. All right. If there's an issue here, though, these five things, these three different canids that I have here, don't breed with one another. Okay? Dogs breed with dogs, yes, but dogs don't breed with coyotes, nor do coyotes breed with wolves. They don't breed in nature with one another, so for a biologist, the biological species definition, we consider these things different from one another. And that's why they're given different species names, right? Canis lupus, Canis tetrans, Canis domesticus. But from a strictly phylogenetic speaking point of view, we might consider those things the same, because genetically they are the same. So, biological species. These are members of a population that actually or potentially interbreed. All right, that's right from this source here. I took that right out of a textbook. Okay. Further, all right, they have the capacity to produce viable offspring. So when you're talking with biologists, this is the definition that they are going to use. This is what they mean when they say a species. All right. But the next part of this is they are reproductively isolated from other such groups. So what do I mean by that? Well, in nature, if organisms isolate themselves from one another, like wolves and coyotes do, we consider them different species because they won't breed with one another. Okay? The same is true for killer whales. And I don't know that much about killer whales, but I know some. All right, here's their genus and species name right there. These things are all the same species. But if you look closely, you see different phenotypes. Like this guy here, the sub-Antarctic killer whale. All right, southern enormous hemisphere. These are different types. What's going on here? Well, what I do know is that research is suggesting that subpopulations of killer whales, while genetically all the same, do not breed with one another. Some pods exhibit pod as a school of killer whales exhibit very different behavioral and social characteristics to other groups. Some groups feed exclusively on fish, and they herd fish like using sonar and echolocation. And they'll even act like wolves in a sense. A pack. They'll drive fish together and then attack from the sides. Those types of killer whales don't breed with the other type. The other type tend to feed solely on things like seals. And they're often more solitary. They don't hunt using sonar. And so what you see is two subspecies almost. This is probably even how speciation, how we get more species on the planet over time, might occur. So, as of right now, they all have the same species name. Someday we might see two species names when marine biologists decide that they are indeed different species. As research suggests, they don't breed with one another. Does an organism have the capacity to produce viable offspring? Well, it turns out some organisms can, like tigers and lions. But these two, you may have heard, tigers and lions were bred in captivity to produce ligers. Alright, that was in the media a couple years ago. Kind of cool. But I will tell you that a tiger and a lion will never reproduce with one another in the wild. As wolves and coyotes, I'd argue, don't reproduce with one another in the wild. So from a biologist's perspective,